Thank you. So to do, am I on? Yeah, great. So to do great data science, we need great data science teams. And my thesis is, it's not enough just to have brilliant data scientists. We need to get domain experts into the mix in our methods development. And more than that, we need to get data scientists getting their hands dirty with real data analysis. And by getting your hands dirty with real data analysis, I don't mean you support the domain experts as they do the data analysis. You need to actually get in there and do the data analysis yourself. And I learned this the hard way. Flip back to 2005. On one level, this was a great success for us. And for me personally, it was one of the highlights as an early data scientist. We've been working on a prioritized project for about a year, overcome a number of important obstacles, and we wrote the paper up. We got it into one of the biggest data mining conferences at the time, and not only that, we actually won the Best Applications Paper Award. And this had some of the ingredients of a data mining success. We were addressing a real problem. In this case, we were looking at a big database of noisy data points, and the problem was to identify those data points that actually related to the same instance in reality. And it was difficult because of the noise. There were no trustworthy data sets. There was no sort of data covariates. I mean, even basic stuff like age and sex could be wrong. So rule-based methods would fail. We also had the challenge of variable amount of information. So some data points were very rich. They had lots of data, and other ones had very little. And there were quite a few data points that were identical. So they were exactly the same, and they still were very unlikely duplicates because you just didn't have enough information to go by. So that needed to be balanced at the same time. We had very limited training data, and then of course we had the computational challenge of running this across a database of millions of data points, and obviously the n-squared complexity of that. But we were able to find a sophisticated yet fast enough method using statistical methods that have been used to link records in a different domain, actually looking at people going in and out of the UK and seeing, are the people coming into the country also leaving the country, or do we have people staying on that shouldn't still be here? So that was a slightly different domain. So we took that, we developed it, we made it faster, and we made it work. But we failed miserably in this respect. That was 2005. And not until this year, in January, did that methodology actually become available to all the relevant external end users. So we had some small wins along the way. So we published some more research. We made the methods available first to some internal users and then to a small group of external end users. But that was still quite late. And it was only 12 years later that it actually brought some real value to the business. And because that's what we want to do, is we want to have an impact on the real work. We want to improve the data analysis. We don't just want to publish papers, right? So that's what we like to accomplish. Now, for context, I should say a few words about who we are. So I am the head of research and the chief science officer of an organization called the Uppsala Monitoring Center. So we're based in Uppsala. We're about 100 people, or a little bit more. It's medical doctors, pharmacists, data scientists, systems developers, salespeople. We work, our primary task is on behalf of the World Health Organization to detect new adverse drug reactions to medicines that are on the market. So drugs that have been approved, that are on there available for use, we don't know everything about them because when we test them primarily for efficacy. Do they actually have an effect on the disease? And we test them in small and quite specialized populations. So we need to be vigilant as they get to the market. And this is where we come in. So we support the operations and the scientific development of what's called the WHO's International Drug Monitoring Program. So that's a little over 100 countries across the world that have decided they should come together and actually share their data and their information in order to detect new risks to patients early. So we have different parts of the mission. It's all about data science. We're sort of a data science organization at the core. But what that means is not only do we want to discover new adverse reactions to medicines. Obviously, we're a small group in Uppsala, so it wouldn't be enough that we just did it in the right way. We also want to improve how this is done by other organizations working with this, most notably the national center. So in Sweden, it would be the Medical Products Agency. In the US, it would be the FDA, and then corresponding groups across the world. So we have a specific mission to advance the science of our field and make that available to the other stakeholders. And also to increase the capacity, not necessarily in those countries that I mentioned now, but the new countries entering the program. So many countries have just started their programs for pharmacovigilance in, say, Africa or Latin America. So we need to help bring them to sort of the top of the data pyramid. In that example I gave you early on, we succeeded in the sense that we actually advanced the science. That is a method that did the work much better than anything that's out there. It's still, I think, performing very well to compare to other things that are out there. We actually helped some other organizations because there were other organizations that went out there and implemented at least their versions of that type of methodology. But we didn't do that third bit. I'm going to say a few words about why I think that is. So let's go back in time. This is now flipping back to around 2004. And the way we operated, in fact, this blue or rectangle, if we let that represent our organization, I was one of those people to the left. I mean, that's the data scientist, and we were not actually part of the organization. We were a separate startup, spun off out of the Royal Institute of Technology here in Stockholm. So we were working independently early on. Actually, by the time that we published that research, most of us actually become part of the organization, but we were our own identity. So we joined the organization, we became the research department, which was actually a data science department at the time. This is not showing everyone in the organization, it's actually just showing another very important group in our organization, and those are the people responsible for the routine data analysis. So those are the people that are actually looking at the data we had, trying to make sense of it, discover new adverse drug reactions. So they were in a different part of the organization. So at that point, our mission was simple. We just were supposed to drive the scientific development forward, and we did that. It's important to note as well that at this point we were driven. I mean, what we did, it wasn't us coming up with cool, fancy data science methods to use or to deploy. We were driven by real needs, but they're not necessarily the sort of the daily, mundane needs of this group. It was actually the needs for perhaps the 5-10 years into the future, as perceived by the top leadership of our organization. So we have very senior people in our organizations, people who have been part of forming this scientific field as it's developed. So they were extremely useful and very sort of far-sighted in seeing some things that we needed to do, and those were the tasks we were working on. So snap forward a little bit. I mean, quite soon we realized it was not enough just to have data scientists, so we addressed that first bit that I mentioned. We need to get some domain experts in there to actually do good data science. So we pulled someone over from that team, got them working on the research. But of course, they were no longer doing the routine analysis anymore. But at least they were helping us inform some of the methods research we were doing. So we were improving that bit of the equation. And then we grew, so we got some more people involved. But we still had that problem of having this group over here, and they were actually running on old methods. So we were developing all these fancy methods over here, making them available, publishing them, using them also for our own applied studies. So because we had some applied people now, domain experts in our group, we started to do some applied research, so doing something similar to what this group was doing here, but more of a proof of concept stage, so new types of analysis. So instead of just looking at, does this drug cause this adverse event, do these two drugs together cause this adverse event from an adverse drug interaction, for example? But this group was hurting. I mean, they were still using old methods from 5 or 10 years back, and they were caught in sort of catch-22 because they didn't have any data science support. It wasn't our task to support them. We actually had a separate, well, we still have a separate systems development group who were supposed to support them with the IT support, and they were screaming for it. They were saying, well, we need IT support, we need better methods. But then the systems group would rightly say, well, you haven't really figured out your processes. You need to define what you should do, and that's where we should start. And we never got going on it, and they just got stuck there using the old methods. So we were not actually innovating our own methods. We were not improving the way we did our own data science in terms of the day-to-day real analysis. And we came to a point where we said, well, this is not working. We need to rethink this. And so we sat down and we rethought, and what we came to the conclusion is we actually need to change things around a bit. And what we did is we actually brought the two groups together. We said, let's come together as one group, share the mission of both advancing the science of what we do, of doing the real analysis, and then bring it to use also to other organizations. So we came together as one team, but we were sort of enough people that we had to split into two. And so deliberately at that point, we chose not to keep the old boundaries. We mixed people from the different parts of the old organizations. We ensured that we had data scientists and domain experts in both teams. So we organized ourselves in that way. But the other important change that we made was that we said this old routine analysis that we had been done, it had been done as sort of a low intensity, continuous effort of looking at data by a few people. And we said, well, that's not going to be the way if we want to really innovate this. So we changed that around, and we actually said, let's do this as a high intensity effort by all of us. But let's block that to specific points in time. So instead of doing it sort of an hour or two every day, a few people, let's block a week or two at a time, and let's all sit together and do it. And we made it a deliberate aim of that, not just to do the data analysis, but actually to change the way we do the analysis at the same time. So bring new methods into that routine data analysis to improve it, and at the same time, both test, evaluate, and refine our own methods at the same time. And that has allowed us to really shorten the lead times from coming up with an idea to getting into routine use. To now, I think we're now at the stage where we actually are using ideas before they even fully thought through. In the most recent activity we had, which was at the start of October, we're using methods that we had, we just set the target that we would even do this in the spring, and then up until just a few, I think, few days before the actual event, some of the data scientists from our organizations who are here will testify, we haven't quite figured out what we do, so we had to do that, and then we have to keep adjusting as we go along as well. So that is the benefit, I think, to the organization. There's also a benefit, I think, in terms of actually doing better data analysis by getting the data scientists involved, even though what we do is largely driven by a clinical assessment, really knowing the medicines we're looking at and the clinical context. Having data scientists involved in that analysis really makes it better, because we look at things with a different perspective and we can bring that to the table. But there are some benefits that are just, okay, this is just us growing, I guess. There are some specific benefits for us as data scientists. And one is that ensures that we are actually fighting the right battles. So by being there at the front line, we can actually see what are the real problems, the real pain points that we should address, and what are some workable solutions that will do that. It gives us a chance of our own first-hand experience. So I think that's important when you can be your own lead user in a way. It's a great way to ensure the quality of what you do, of your implementations, but actually using them for real. And not to be underestimated, it gives you a chance to gain your own first-hand experience, and that gives you leverage in the scientific discussions. Because if you've done the work yourself, you can come with a lot more credence to those discussions. You can say, this is important because I've seen this. You're not at the mercy of somebody else's experience of what is important and what they've seen. You actually have done the work yourself. There are also key benefits for the domain experts. Obviously, they now have early access. So instead of waiting there, sitting there across the fence, waiting for us to sort of toss methods over to them and they're not being able to use them, they now can actually have early access to the methods, use them early on, influence the way in which they are developed so they actually meet their needs and address the real challenges that they have. And then they have the added benefit of the flexibility, working together with data scientists who can on the fly actually do some analysis that would not be possible for them to do on their own. To make this a success, of course, you need to have some things in place. And I think one important thing for us has been to share a growth mindset. And I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but essentially the idea is if you have a growth mindset, it's more important to make an effort to learn than to look smart, right? So if you think of it, I mean, one of my things I do at night is I coach youth football. And most of the kids will say, I can't kick with my left foot. Whereas what we would like them to say is, I cannot kick with my left foot yet. And not to worry that they're going to look silly trying for a while, but actually focus on the learning experience. That's the kind of mindset we want there, and that's the kind of mindset we also want as a data science team. Because obviously, the field of data science is moving at a rapid pace. So we need to be open to learn new techniques, new methods. And also, if you're going to work in this way that I'm advocating, you need to be open to step out of your comfort zone and go into a domain where you may know nothing and learn something about that domain. So key things to do, if, to show a growth mindset is ask questions, ask for help, be ready to try new strategies, and always make sure that you learn from the setbacks. If you do those three things, I think you're on a good path. Another important thing, I think, is for us to have the real impact that we want, it's not enough just to do the right analysis. We really need to think about how we communicate those results. Because as John Moon has said, information is not power, but clarity and impact is. And so for that, we really need to think through how do we convey the results of our studies. And I think we need to be a little bit brave and not just present them always in a neutral way. We need to look at what we have, identify what are the key pieces of information, what is the story that the data is telling us, while being transparent and saying, these are the pieces of evidence pointing in the other direction. But we need to do some of a little bit of storytelling. That's actually my next slide, but I'll say it now anyway. I think we need to do a little bit of storytelling. So we need to be showing the red threads, simplifying some of the results, and being prepared to go deeper when we need to. But I think it's not enough just to sort of present everything in a big table. And this book, if you haven't already read it, I think it gives you a lot of concrete practical advice, anything from how should you round your numbers, when should you use a table instead of a graph, and when you use a graph, which is the right graph to be using. So that's a good go-to place. So I'll skip that one. I do think we need to put greater emphasis on the science of data science. I, for one, do not think the Pareto Principle applies to data analysis. The Pareto Principle, you'll perhaps know, is the basic idea that 20% of the effort gives you 80% of the value. And that applies in many areas. So people will say in sales, your 20% top customers give you 80% of the revenue. Or if you're building a computer program, 20% of the features give you 80% of the value. But data analysis, I think it's different, because if you get it 95% right, that final bit you got wrong could throw the entire analysis. And that may not only mean that you don't get the value that you wanted, you may actually induce a cost. So we need to be very mindful of this. And this is something I've found, in particular recently, that we've started to work a bit in social media and look at some of the data science going on in social media. And when you sort of start to scratch the surface a bit, you see that there's great over-optimism in results that are presented. And it's basic stuff. I mean, it's not like checking your internal validity. So not doing cross-validation at all on your results, or doing cross-validation in a defunct way where you don't account for the fact you have duplicates, so you're not, in fact, doing a proper cross-validation, or not thinking about the external validation, so not accounting for the fact that you're looking in a specific subset and it won't generalize to the broader context. I think scientific publication and peer review is a good thing. It's one step in the direction of ensuring high quality. It's not always enough. We know that there's always published results that are also not true, but at least it forces you to that extra effort. And we see this ourselves many times, because we've done a study, and to go for peer review and publication, I think it changes your definition of done. Because oftentimes I've done a study, I think we developed a method that seems to work, and when you sit down to write that paper, you're going to convey that to an external audience. That's when you learn, oh, wait, I actually made this assumption a couple of years ago that I just did, and it doesn't actually hold, or this was a simplification, and when I change that, that actually has an impact on the bottom line. So I think that's an important piece. One benefit we've had in our organization from working with the domain experts is that the domain in question is the analysis of medicines. And I think the field of epidemiology, which is the study of causes and effects on health in populations, actually may be a missing piece of the data science puzzle. So we often think of statistics and computer science and domain expertise as pillars of data science. I think this is something to add to that mix. Because it is looking at observational data. That means data that's not randomized. And when you haven't randomized, you have a lot of sources of error, of systematic error, that you need to be aware of if you don't want to end up in those 5% error that's going to have an impact on your conclusions. So I'm not going to go into this, but I'll just encourage anyone who's not familiar to look there if we really want to sort of grow as a data scientist. Okay, so there are some pitfalls. I think this is the way forward, but it's not always going to be easy. One potential pitfall is that some mistakes do have serious consequences. And so if you're going to let your data scientists loose with the actual analysis, you need to think through what kind of mandate will they have. And you need to put the checks and balances in place so you ensure that they do not make mistakes that have serious consequences for your business. So in our case, this could be that some of the decisions made have to be reviewed by a medic, for example. There is also risk when more people, especially the data scientists, get involved in the actual analysis, is of course that you almost drown in the low-hanging fruit. You see all the simple things, all the quick fixes that you would do that would really improve that data analysis. So we're going to pay off immediately. You did really see the value of that. And you end up maybe only prioritizing the low-hanging fruit and forgetting about the bigger picture. So forgetting what we were good at, way back in 2005, which was working on the long-term problems. What you have to do is you have to let some of that low-hanging fruit rot on the tree. And that's easy to say. It's hard to do in reality, of course. Some of it is sort of strategy, and you may put structures in place. We did at one point, we had some data scientists allocating a few days a week where they wouldn't do any sort of short-term projects or any support to the domain experts. They would just work on their long-term projects. Because we need slack to be creative, right? We need some slack to work on the new stuff, to get creative, to get wild, learn new methods. One good opportunity is when you bring, if you're a growing organizations like we have been, it's good when you get new people on board because they don't have all the baggage of all the existing projects, so they can go a bit wild. In Sweden, I think we have the benefit of having quite long parental leaves. So that's also an opportunity. Somebody goes away on parental leave, they drop things, other people pick them up. When they come back, you could use that slack to let them go a bit wild. So we haven't solved this. I think it's an open question how to crack that nut, but I think it is really important. Another problem that we have faced as we have become more sort of domain analysis focused is that there is the risk that data scientists become support actors. So data scientists could just become the person that you ask for simple computational stuff. You give them a task, do this, do that. They're not invited to the right discussions, the scientific discussions, or they're not invited early enough. You come at the end, so, oh, you fixed this. I mean, show me that this is significant. Those kinds of scenarios. We do not want that. And this is not sinister on behalf of the domain experts, because we had exactly the opposite. When we go back in time to 2005, when there was like a data science group and a few domain experts embedded, it was the opposite. So I would do that. I would think, well, I've got a grasp of what we're trying to do. I don't really need a pharmacist, to help me now. This is now a mathematical problem. So I think we all do this, and we just have to keep reminding ourselves the different expertise areas that we need to really involve the other side. This is an N of 1 observational study. That means it's an anecdotal experience of one single organization. So we don't know how well it will generalize, but I'm very interested to hear experiences from other parts of the group. So if you've done something similar or not have done it, very much look forward to that. Thank you.